All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is February 19th. Happy Monday. Excuse me. Today's discussion for a lot of the classes has dealt with the beginning of Japanese expansion and the building of the Japanese Empire after World War I and into the 1920s and into the 1930s. Now, we saw last week during one of the videos that we watched regarding the world wars with the buildup of Hitler, Mussolini, and other people that Japan becomes an ally of the Axis powers. But, what drives them to that desire to join two dictators with possibly one of their own in Hideki Tojo to become one of those Axis powers that was going to go up against the Americans, British, and the French. So, and also the Soviets. But anyways, today's discussion is about how Japanese builds that empire, at least the beginning of it. Like, where are they at after World War I? Where do they stand? And then what does that do to force their hand in terms of building up their own empire, so to speak? So like what the British did throughout American colonial times, right? So pretty short video today dealing with some of this stuff because we did do some current events. So if you missed today, you missed current events. So I want to make sure that you know that we didn't get too far, but if you have some of this stuff on the notes, make sure you fill some of this stuff out, all right? So the Belger question refers to some of the general geographic problems that many Japanese governments have faced before in the past and still face to this day. Of a population, of an island nation like Japan grows every year. What are some problems they might face in the future? Also, people said stuff like overpopulation, starvation because of food not being brought in adequately. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to go on with Japan that has to go right to make sure the population is given everything they need to survive. Now, there is poverty. It does exist in Japan, but at the same time, there's a lot of wealth there today. But back in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, right after World War I, before World War II, where's Japan like at this point? They're an island nation. Their population grows. They might have trouble feeding their population. So, what are some choices they have to solve some of these problems? Well, a lot of people believe that Japan's idea comes out of expanding themselves. So this island nation of Japan here, they can only go so far. All right, when they can only go so far, it's going to be a major problem for them to continue to build up with the land that they only have available on these islands. So we're going to look at some different parts today, from especially from Japan 1911, 1930. What are they doing after during World War I, after World War I? So what are they looking at? So we have two questions on your notes, and you can see here with a growing military power after courageous defense of Great Britain. But we're looking at Japan at this point. So if you go through growing military power, look at the book on page 581. Look at these two questions. So go on your online book, check those out. Pause this video, and you can get those answers, and then we'll review them here. All right, so pause it. All right, for the rest of you, hopefully, not the rest of you, excuse me, if you just look these questions up, here's what we got here for this. So how would you describe Japan's interaction with the rest of the world? Obviously, they're not completely isolated. After World War I, they've dealt with the Treaty of Versailles negotiations. They were there. They were interacting with other countries around the world. However, they didn't get their wishes or needs met, which is a major problem for them. So when we look at the idea of getting Japan interacting with the rest of the world at this point, they aren't the best at it, but at the same time, they are doing their best to make sure that they aren't getting left behind by the Western powers of Europe, especially Europe. All right? So they are interacting. Two evidences are obviously the Treaty of Versailles conference that they are at, but the second one is also the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Remember back in the 1920s we talked about Harding's Kellogg-Briand Pact, which allowed countries to pretty much ignore the ability to go to war, to say we're going to negotiate our needs and desires peacefully. We're not going to worry about war in this end. We're going to stay peaceful at all costs. That's what they signed. So they are interacting with the rest of the world here to make sure that they are up to terms with what other countries want. Now, the second question, which should be really easy, probably didn't need to use a book for this, but what economic event cripples Japan's ability to sell their goods to foreign countries? This would be the Great Depression. Yes, the American Great Depression reaches countries all over the world, including Europe and also including Japan. This really hurts their ability to sell their own goods to individuals around, not only in their country but also around the world, because every other country is increasing their tariffs. So any goods coming from Japan to other countries are going to be really expensive, so nobody will buy them. This lack of profit really hurts Japanese businesses because they can't hire people. Well, people aren't getting hired. They are spending money. When not spending money, the economy really takes a tumble. When we studied that in America, we saw the same thing. So it's really a big difference, a big problem that many of the Japanese face at this time period, and they want to place the blame on somebody. And many people thought the blame, this is on our notes section here, that the civilian government leading Japan was part of the problem. Now, when the Japanese get visited by Matthew Perry in the 1800s for the first time, the Japanese get a glimpse of what westernized civilization looks like, and they realize that they're kind of behind the curve here, not only militarily but also economically. So they try to change it. When they eventually get up to par economically, they change their governmental system to a civilian government, not just a empire or an emperor or a military leader. So this civilian government, which represents the people and it is represented and chosen by the people, is something that is perceived as weak, because many people in Japan didn't think that the lower class of individuals had the ability to properly choose who was going to lead the country forward. Kind of like what our founding fathers in America felt about voting rights. They believed that only landowning white males should vote. So because they were the only ones that had the ability to make the decisions that really affected economic and political life throughout the United States. But it was only their concerns they were worried about. They weren't worried about the concerns of somebody else, because apparently to them they didn't matter. This is the same thing goes with the Japanese here. A lot of the aristocratic higher ups and wealthy individuals in the Japanese society did not like the civilian government because it gave lower people the choice when it came to government, and many people didn't think that they had the ability to properly choose. All right. Next, now Japanese army takes things in their own hands. This is kind of a big jump here. If you continue reading on, you can see how the Japanese army invades. But the part of Manchuria and China that they invade, it's a region of China, and northeast China especially. If you look at where the Korean Peninsula sits, where North and South Korea is, that part that connects China to North Korea and north, that region there is what we call Manchuria. Now, the Japanese army that currently has a station there invades Manchuria, and it has currently, taken over from the military control there. Now, the civilian government does not approve of this because the civilian government, as they said, is perceived as weak. The Japanese army only knows one thing, and that is strength. So obviously, the two differing opinions here begin to clash. So the Japanese army invades, and they call this area Manchukuo. Now, it's an independent nation under Japanese control. Now, eventually, the military does take and seize control of the civilian government, and they begin to regulate this idea in Manchukuo. Now that the section of Manchuria is now an independent nation under Japanese control. We like to call it a puppet state, meaning that this independent nation will do and act in arrangement with what Japan wants. So it's kind of shady how it's played up. It's not just a colony of Japan. It's an independent nation under Japanese control. So they call it Manchukuo. Now, Japan is a part of the League of Nations here. At this point, not only did they sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact, but they're also part of the League of Nations. So, being a country from the Far East, having representation there is a big deal. But the problem is, once they start taking Manchuria, their representatives are harassed by the British and the French and other European countries that they are not allowed to seize Manchuria because of the implications of the people that currently live there. The Japanese are upset with the European countries because all they see is a Hippocratic few nations who are willing to help their own causes, but at the same time harm the causes of Japan. But if you think about it, the British and the French, they're the worst colonizers of them all. They spent years colonizing other nations, specifically the Americas, Africa, India, Australia. So they've spent a lot of time colonizing, and they still have colonies around the world. And the Japanese are like, you guys are hypocrites. How can we not be allowed to take our own territory based on our own needs for resources? Great Britain, you're in the same position as us. You're an island nation. Why can't we take these like you did? And so Britain and France are not able to see the reason of Japan. They still dissuade them. They still, not shun them, but they still, publicly condone or publicly dismiss these actions by the Japanese as lawful. As a result, the Japanese withdraws from the League of Nations because they would refuse to leave Manchuria, and they didn't want to let that go because that's a vast amount of resources there. So that's all we got to today with this stuff. So understand that the Japanese, they had relationships with other countries in terms of trading and political dealings, but at the same time, their relationship with the Western world and Europe is constantly strained because, one, the European nations don't think Japanese interests are important because it could be racial reasons, it also could be their location around the world. So the Japanese are upset by that. And two, because of this Manchurian incident that is now supported by the non-civilian government, this Manchukuo state is something that is not supported by the League of Nations, and Japan officially withdraws because they don't get that support. All right, that Britain got. All right. So whether they believed it was something that was out of economics, that the British, wanted this all to themselves, but they wouldn't let anybody else do it, whatever reason that was, the Japanese still withdrew. So the tensions are very, very high. And this is one of the main reasons why Japan joins the Axis powers, because, the territorial expansion, the quest for more territory that Hitler and Mussolini took on is something the Japanese could relate to. So this is an army that is out of control, that is under the command of General Hideki Tojo, and they are primed to continue their expansion, which we will get to tomorrow. All right? Everybody have a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.